All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. So we started yesterday Os Mem Gimel in Tzidkas Hatzaddik, and we were speaking about over here the incredible yisod that Reb Tzaddik introduced us to, namely the concept that the Tzahara that HaKadosh Baruch Hu implants inside of us, that is a conquerable one. Because anything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us, by definition, we could overcome. That's the famous adage, God never gives you a challenge that you cannot meet. However, there is such a thing as the Yetzer Hara, which cannot be overcome by the individual by himself. And that Yetzer Hara is often the Yetzer Hara that we create when we make bad decisions, repeated bad decisions, and we reinforce negative things. That creates a Yetzer Hara that can be inconquerable by us as individuals. But even in that moment, when quote unquote I have an inconquerable Yetzer Hara, the Ribono Shel Olam always says that I will be there by your side to help you in this quest. I'll be there by your side to help you in this mission, in this endeavor, to try to go ahead and overcome the Yetzer Hara. So we're picking up, there's one more paragraph to the introduction, which I'd like to focus on today. So on page Tzaddik Ches, in the Be'urei Hasidus, the left-hand side. So the Rebbe writes as follows. He says, Le'el Mevur, She'ishli Adam Lehizar Shelo Litos La'achiach Li'atzmo. So we'll say, remember again, he readdresses or brings up over here that which we learned in Os Lametes, a very fascinating idea. Namely, that a person should not go ahead and assume that just because something he is involved in life is successful, means that in particular endeavor is blessed by the Ribono Shel Olam. Look at his words. He says, Shelo litos, a person shouldn't make a mistake, or to prove to himself, that a particular action or a particular endeavor is appropriate to do based on the fact we spoke about this extensively in Os Lametes, a really fascinating idea that we generally assume that if I'm doing something and it's matzliach, that must mean that the endeavor is blessed by God. But in fact, remember again, that's not always the case. Sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows us to be successful in certain areas which are not good for us as a form of nisayon, as a form of test for us. He goes on, he says, Mishum sheitochin shesiyuazu chu nisay min Hashem. Because sometimes, Rabbosai, the very assistance that I receive from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order to be successful in something, that success is not because the Ribono Shel Olam is happy with my efforts, but that success sometimes is the result of a nisayon. That is a test by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Ribono Shel Olam wants to test me in a particular area. V'yesh lachshosh ulai sharsho shoresh pore rosh v'la'ano chas v'shalom. Dainu, she's natik lechalukin mishorish Yisrael, ad shemachshilim oser rachmano l'tzlam min Hashem b'dvar avera. I will say, so sometimes a person has to be nervous that perhaps, again, the reason why HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving me this nisayon is because maybe I've done things wrong. Maybe at the end of the day, the way I've been exercising my free will, unfortunately paints a picture of an individual who's not interested in Kedusha, who's not interested in good, who's not interested in holiness. And therefore, maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is placing this test, this stumbling block in my way. He goes on, Amnam, Ba'os Ze Yisbar. So we'll say, so on one hand, we have this idea that even if you're successful in life, a person shouldn't always see success as a divine blessing or encouragement of the life that I'm leading or the path I'm going down. Because sometimes success itself is the nisayon. So on the other hand, I will say, so this Seif comes to speak about on the other end of the spectrum. He goes on, he says, Amnam Ba'os Zu, in this particular Os Yisbar, Sheme'idach, Yesh li Adam lehizar gam imra shemiskabra lav Yetzer Hara kol kach ad shenidma lo shelo yeh mesugal lamo negdo. We'll say conversely, in this Seif, what does the Shulchan Aruch talk? I'm sorry, what does Reb Tzaddik talk about? In this Seif, Reb Tzaddik talks about a person encountering a Yetzer Hara that is so strong that a person says to himself, I can't overcome this. I can't overcome this. Shelo yochiach mizeh that a person should never think that because he has the Yetzer Hara that is so strong that he feels he can't overcome it, he should not intuit that to mean that God doesn't love him, or that he's cut off from Klal Yisrael. V'zeh mipnei sheyesh gamas hamusag shel Yitzro onso kol kach la'aveira ad shenechshav kilu nasa shelo midaito klal u'memela ein lo ala shum onesh. So we'll say because there is a concept, says Reb Tzaddik, as we talked about yesterday, concept, namely that the Yetzer could become so strong that a person lacks the internal ability to fight it. This is what the Gemara calls, or Chazal call, Yitzro onso. An ones also means extenuating circumstances. Sometimes my Yetzer can be so strong that it's an extenuating circumstance. I don't have the ability. I feel like I lack the resources to be able to fight it. He goes on, he says, so we'll say, so here, understand what Reb Tzaddik just did. He kind of just painted the extremes. So on one hand, you could have a person who is blessed with incredibly ridiculous success. And that success, yet interestingly enough, may not be a bracha from Hashem, but in fact may be an isayon, a test from Hashem. So that's what I have on one level. On the other side of the spectrum, I could have a person who is so overwhelmed by his Yetzer, so overwhelmed that he says to himself, I don't have the ability to fight this Yetzer. And I both say, see, I think before most of us learned Reb Tzaddik, Os Mem Gimel, if somebody would have come over to you and said, my Yetzer is so strong, I lack the ability to really fight it, you would have said to that person, try harder, right? Try harder. No such thing. No such thing as the Yetzer Hara, which is unovercomable. It's just not true. It's just not true. And Reb Tzaddik says, it is true. It is true. Now I will say, now let's understand, how do you get such a strong Yetzer Hara like that? Right? Because normally a person would say, I have such a strong Yetzer Hara, I can't overcome. This must be the way that God made me. So it says that's a false statement. That's a false statement. I mean, how do you get a Yetzer Hara that is so strong that it feels unovercomable? So that's me. I made that, right? The Yetzer Hara that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives me, that is absolutely overcomable. That Yetzer Hara can be dealt with, can be overcome. But the problem is when I make repeated bad mistakes and reinforce the Yetzer Hara and grow the Yetzer Hara, that's when it's quite possible that it becomes a certain point where I can't overcome it. And in that way, it's Yitzra onso. A person could literally get to a state of ones, of extenuating circumstances vis-a-vis his Yetzer Hara. Now I was saying, that's Reb Tzaddik, but here's where you have to be careful. What do you have to be careful with? He said, Aval yesh bazeh, we'll end with this, Aval bazeh yesh makom la'adam litos taos chamura. In this area, a person can make a very serious and severe mistake. What's the serious and severe mistake? V'yesh lachshod bi'atzmo, shulai be'emes yesh biyachalaso b'kocho li'izkar be'al yitzro, shalo la'avor averazu. I will say, the challenge over here is knowing when your Yetzer Hara is unconquerable versus when you just need to try harder. Herein lies, or Tzaddik says, the great challenge. Because I will say, on one hand, what we just learned now in Os Mem Gimel, this is very dangerous. Very dangerous. Because now what have we just created? We just created the most incredible excuse. Most incredible excuse. If something is too hard for you, so just say, what am I going to do? Yitzro onso, the Yetzer Hara is too great. So Tzaddik says, remember, here's where personal honesty plays an incredibly important role. Is my Yetzer Hara to the point that I can't overcome it? Or is it just that I need to go ahead and try harder? And I both say, of course, no one could really answer that question for me but me. So on one hand, I could have success that looks like it's a bracha from God, yet it's truly an isayon. And then on the other hand, I have a Yetzer Hara that I was born with that is conquerable and overcomable. I have a Yetzer Hara that I create, which essentially builds on the Yetzer Hara that I was born with, and that could come to a point that it's so strong that I can't overcome it. But again, life is all about this personalistic honesty. Is it that I can't overcome a Yetzer Hara? Or the truth is, I don't want to overcome a Yetzer Hara, or I'm not trying hard enough to overcome a Yetzer Hara. That requires me ultimately to answer those difficult questions. So as Reb Tzaddik, here's where you have to be very careful, because how many people will utilize this incredible Yetzer Hara as a cop-out? Too hard, too overwhelming. Chash Baruch Hu, if you want me to overcome it, you have to help me, but otherwise I can't do it on my own. So we'll say, so what do you do in those moments when your Yetzer Hara is too powerful to overcome? So what do? Says Reb Tzaddik, here's where tefillah comes in. In those moments when you feel that you are up against the Yetzer Hara, that is so powerful, bless you, it's too powerful, I can't handle it on my own, that's where tefillah comes in. That's where tefillah comes in. Where I can't do this. I can't do this. So by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this yesterday. Reb Tzaddik is not inventing this idea. This is the Gemara Maseches Brachos. That the Gemara says that the Yetzer Hara is so strong that ilmali HaKadosh Baruch Hu ozro. It would be impossible. Or is it maybe Sota? I don't know if it's Brachos or it might be Sota. So we'll say, but the Gemara explicitly says this, talks about a Yetzer Hara that is so strong that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wouldn't help me, I wouldn't be able to overcome it. So what does that mean? So that Gemara by itself is also very theologically troubling. So you're telling me now that God has given me a challenge that I can't overcome on my own, I need His assistance? So Tzaddik says, no, it's two different types of Yetzer Hara. What we'll call the innate Yetzer Hara is conquerable. It's conquerable on my own. The amplified Yetzer Hara, which is the Yetzer Hara, which is the result, which is compounded by my negative activity, yes, sometimes we'll say, isn't this incredible? Sometimes it's going to sound strange, but sometimes I can make something more powerful than God. Meaning, not more powerful than God. I can make something that is more powerful than God's creation, right? God's Yetzer Hara, I can overcome. Meaning, God's Yetzer Hara that He implanted inside, I can overcome. The Yetzer Hara that I create, sometimes I literally can't overcome that. So what do you do when faced with that type of Yetzer Hara? Says Reb Tzaddik, that's where tefillah comes in. Tefillah is the mechanism at the end of the day where I reach out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, Ribono Shel Olam, I got myself in a hole. I got myself in a really bad place. I own it. I did this. I got myself here. But I also know I cannot extricate myself from it. I tried legitimately. I put in the effort. I can't get myself out of it. Ribono Shel Olam, I need you to be by my side. I need you to pull me out. And says Reb Tzaddik, that's the chesed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for us. Even though I created the problem, He is willing to be part of the solution. All right, so we'll stop over here. We'll pick up. We'll get into the kishkas of Osman Gimel in Mirza Hashem on Monday.